The luxury aircraft showroom was cool and quiet, like even the air had to be as exclusive as the jets inside. The huge glass walls reflected the spotless shine of the displayed aircraft, true airborne palaces. These were not just planes. They were symbols of power, wealth, and status. No ordinary millionaire could walk in and buy one. These jets were for the richest of the rich, oil tycoons, billionaire CEOs, members of royal families. Just stepping into this showroom meant you had to have a bank account filled with more money than most people could even dream of. That's why, when the automatic glass doors slid open and a man walked in, the reaction was immediate. Keanu Reeves strolled inside with an easy, relaxed stride, as if he had no idea what kind of place he had just entered. He wore a faded cap, an old gray t-shirt, and worn-out jeans. His sneakers were scuffed, not the kind of shoes that ever touched the showroom's glossy marble floors. Normally, the only people who came here wore perfectly polished Italian leather shoes, tailored suits, and expensive watches. The salesman, a tall, blond man in a sharp, perfectly fitted suit, spotted Keanu right away. His whole body stiffened. For a second, he simply stood there, staring in confusion. His trained eyes scanned Keanu from head to toe, trying to figure out what he was seeing. What is this guy doing here? Without even thinking, he glanced toward the security guard stationed in the corner of the showroom. "Do I need you here?" his expression silently asked. The security guard, a broad-shouldered man in a black suit, studied the scene. He seemed ready to step in to escort this unexpected visitor out. But since Keanu wasn't causing trouble, he stayed where he was, just watching. The salesman swallowed, adjusting his tie as if simply looking at Keanu was making him uncomfortable. He took a deep breath, straightened his posture, and stepped forward with a forced smile. His voice was smooth, polite, but cold. "Sir," he greeted stiffly. Keanu's face remained neutral. A faint hint of amusement flickered in his dark eyes. "May I help you?" the salesman asked, putting extra emphasis on help, as if making it clear that he didn't believe Keanu was a real customer. Keanu's gaze drifted to the planes around him. His eyes filled with admiration. He wasn't just looking, he was appreciating them. He took a slow breath as if enjoying the sight, then turned back to the salesman and smiled casually. "I'd like to see some models." The salesman's eyebrows shot up. His expression changed instantly. "Models?" he repeated like he had just heard something ridiculous. His arms crossed over his chest. His head tilted slightly as he took another slow, judging look at Keanu's outfit. The old cap, the faded jeans, the plain t-shirt. The idea of this man buying a jet seemed insane. Leaning in slightly, the salesman lowered his voice as if sharing an important secret. "Are you sure you're in the right place, sir?" It wasn't really a question. It was a warning. A polite way of saying you don't belong here. Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't frown, didn't look offended. He just took a slow breath, kept his easy smile, and answered smoothly. "Yes, I'm in the right place." The salesman's fake smile didn't disappear, but his discomfort was becoming obvious. He exhaled sharply, glancing around as if expecting someone to step in and remove Keanu from the showroom. "Well," the salesman said, his voice still polite but laced with irritation. "We sell extremely expensive jets here, mister." He dragged out the words extremely expensive, making sure Keanu got the message. This was his last chance. The final warning. But Keanu only nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what I'd like to see." The salesman blinked. Twice. "I'm sorry, what?" "I want to see the most exclusive aircraft you have here." For a moment, the salesman didn't move. His brain seemed to freeze, struggling to process the words he had just heard. He turned to one of his colleagues behind the counter, silently asking for help. But the other employee just shrugged, looking equally baffled. Then the salesman turned back to Keanu, waiting for him to start laughing, to reveal that this was all some kind of joke. But Keanu didn't laugh. He just stood there waiting. The salesman's jaw tightened. His lips pressed into a thin, irritated line. He wanted to tell this man to leave. He wanted to tell him that he wasn't going to waste time showing off jets worth hundreds of millions of dollars to someone who clearly wasn't a serious buyer. But what if he was wrong? What if this scruffy-looking man was some kind of eccentric billionaire? A quiet tech mogul who didn't like to flaunt his wealth? The salesman inhaled deeply, exhaled in a long, exaggerated sigh, and gestured dismissively. "Fine. If that's what you want." He turned on his heel and strode toward the VIP section, the area where only the most expensive, luxurious jets were displayed. As he walked, he hoped Keanu would get nervous and leave. But Keanu didn't leave. He followed calmly as if he had every right to be there. The other employees exchanged confused glances. Nobody could understand what was happening. Why was Keanu Reeves here? The showroom was silent, except for the sharp click-click of the salesman's leather shoes against the marble floor. He walked fast. He wanted this to be over. Keanu, however, didn't rush. He stayed at the same relaxed pace, seeming completely unaware of the salesman's impatience. And that made the salesman even more annoyed. Finally, they reached the VIP section. The salesman abruptly stopped and waved his hand toward the first jet. Here. Falcon LX 900. He didn't even bother looking at Keanu as he spoke. It's efficient, comfortable. Italian leather seats. Can handle transatlantic flights easily. His voice was dry. Bored. He wasn't really showing off the plane, he was testing Keanu. Would Keanu finally realize he didn't belong here? Or was there still more to this story? Keanu didn't back away. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at the airplane calmly. His face was relaxed, as if none of this mattered to him. The bright lights in the showroom reflected off the smooth, polished surface of the jet. This one looks nice, he said, tilting his head slightly. But it's not the most special one, is it? The salesman let out a sharp breath, closing his eyes for a moment, like he was trying to stop himself from yelling. Then, with a heavy sigh, he turned around, his movements quick and irritated. Without even trying to hide his frustration, he pointed to another jet, his voice sharp and cold. All right, he said. Gulfstream G7500. His tone changed, emphasizing every word slowly. $70 million. His arms crossed tightly over his chest, his jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed. He was watching Keanu carefully, waiting for his reaction. He wanted Keanu to look shocked. He wanted to see him flinch, stammer, or hesitate. He wanted Keanu to finally understand that he didn't belong here. But Keanu didn't react. He didn't gasp. He didn't step back. He didn't even blink. Instead, he just nodded, completely unfazed. Impressive, he said, his voice calm. But still, this isn't the most special one, is it? The salesman froze. His lips pressed into a tight line. His face twisted, first in confusion, then in pure annoyance. He let out a short, harsh laugh. But it wasn't a real laugh. It was cold. Bitter. You've got to be joking, he said, shaking his head. He turned to fully face Keanu now, his patience gone. He pointed a finger straight at him, his voice lowering, his words slower and more forceful. Listen here, sir, he said through gritted teeth. This is not a joke. He took a step forward, standing even closer now, like he was trying to crush Keanu with his presence. His expression darkened. His tone became harsher. You can't just walk in here and waste my time, he said, glaring at him. He shook his head, laughing again, but this time it was mean. This isn't a mall. It's not a museum. He waved his hand around, motioning toward the showroom filled with massive, gleaming jets. We don't sell souvenirs. We don't give tours. His eyes locked onto Keanu's, now burning with irritation. This isn't some theme park where you can pretend you belong. Keanu still didn't move. He just stood there watching. But the salesman wasn't finished. No, he wanted to hurt. These jets? He gestured around, his voice sharp. They cost real money. His words dripped with condescension. This place? It's for real people. He narrowed his eyes, his gaze turning colder. People with power. People who are part of something bigger. Then he looked Keanu up and down, scanning his clothes, his posture, everything. And finally, with a smirk of pure disgust, he said it. And you? He spat out the words like poison. You look like a broke nobody. The last word hit like a slap. The entire showroom fell silent. The salesman stood tall, waiting, confident that this would be the final blow. Now surely this idiot would understand. Now surely he would lower his head, mumble an excuse, and walk out in shame. But he didn't. Keanu did nothing. His expression didn't change. He didn't flinch. He didn't frown. He didn't sigh. Instead, he just smiled. A small, calm smile. The salesman felt a sudden chill run down his spine. What? Keanu took a slow step forward. And now he was the one looking down at the salesman. The salesman's chest felt tight. Something was wrong. Keanu tilted his head slightly. His voice was soft, steady, and completely controlled when he spoke. Can I see the most special airplane now? The salesman's face went pale. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For the first time, he didn't know what to say. This man, this nobody, was still standing here. Still looking at him. Still asking for the most expensive jet. He should be embarrassed. He should feel humiliated. He should have left. But he didn't. And for the first time, the salesman felt something strange. Fear. Had he made a huge mistake? The air felt heavy. The salesman had to take back control. He forced out a dry laugh, trying to push away the doubt creeping into his chest. "Do you still not get it?" he said sharply. He took a slow step forward, eyes filled with frustration. "This place isn't for just anyone." His voice dropped lower, sharp and mocking. "You think you're impressing someone?" he sneered. "You're just wasting my time." Other employees had stopped what they were doing to watch. Nobody interfered. "This isn't a game," the salesman snapped. He waved his arms around at the showroom. "These planes cost hundreds of millions of dollars." His stare darkened. "Real men do business here." Then he leaned in closer, his voice almost a whisper, dripping with arrogance. "And you are not one of them." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. But Keanu didn't blink. His calm was unbreakable. And in that moment, the salesman felt something worse than anger. Doubt. Had he made a terrible mistake? The salesman cleared his throat, trying to shake off the strange feeling creeping into his gut. One last time he stepped forward, standing inches from Keanu. His voice was low, almost a growl. "You've wasted enough time here." His eyes narrowed, filled with venom. "And you've made us waste enough time too." Then, slowly, he pointed toward the exit. "So get out." The room was silent. Nobody moved. Then finally Keanu took a small step back. The salesman felt victorious. He had won. Or at least that's what he thought. Because Keanu didn't leave. Instead he let out a light sigh. He looked around the room for a moment, then turned his gaze back to the salesman. And then, he smiled. A calm, relaxed smile. But this time there was something different about it. Something strange. Something powerful. The salesman suddenly felt uneasy. "What now?" he snapped, exhausted and frustrated. And then Keanu finally spoke. His voice was low, controlled, unshaken. "Are you sure?" The salesman frowned. "Sure about what?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He simply studied him. Then slowly he tilted his head slightly, and repeated it. But this time his voice carried weight. "Are you sure?" A cold shiver ran down the salesman's back. His breath hitched slightly. What did that mean? Why was this man still so calm? Why was he still standing there? He should have left. But he hadn't. And now, the salesman suddenly felt like he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Keanu did not back down. The salesman got angry and pushed him out of the store. But then Keanu asked a simple question. "Are you sure?" The salesman's smile faded. He felt a strange, cold fear inside. He had won, right? He had kicked this man out, made it clear that he didn't belong here. So why didn't he feel in control? Keanu stood still, calm, as if this was exactly what he wanted. Then footsteps echoed through the showroom. Strong, fast, serious. The salesman quickly turned, expecting a security guard to come and agree with him. But it wasn't security. It was the store manager. The salesman's face turned pale. His heart started beating faster. The manager walked straight toward them, his eyes sharp, focused. The salesman knew right away, something was wrong. The manager stopped, looked at Keanu, then at the salesman and frowned. "What's going on here?" he asked. His voice was calm but strong. The salesman tried to act normal. He forced a smile, but his voice shook a little. "Oh, sir. Everything is under control," he said quickly. "This man," he looked at Keanu with annoyance, "was wasting our time. I already asked him to leave." The manager was silent for a moment. Then he let out a short laugh. It wasn't a friendly laugh. The salesman's stomach twisted. The manager crossed his arms. "Wasting your time?" The salesman felt nervous. "Yes," he said quickly. "I told him we only sell to special customers. People with a lot of money." The manager raised an eyebrow. "People with a lot of money, huh?" The salesman gulped. Then the manager turned to Keanu and smiled, a real warm smile. "Mr. Reeves, it's a great honor to have you in our store." The salesman froze. His heart stopped. "Mr. Reeves?" No. Slowly he turned to look at Keanu again. And now everything looked different. The face, the beard, the calm smile. Now he recognized him. Keanu Reeves. The salesman felt like the ground had disappeared beneath him. His whole body went cold. His legs felt weak. He had just kicked out one of the most famous and richest men in the world. He tried to speak, to explain, but no words came out. He looked at Keanu, hoping he would say this was all a mistake. But Keanu just smiled. He had known the whole time. He knew exactly what he was doing. The manager's smile disappeared. His face turned serious. "I trust you were treated with respect, Mr. Reeves?" Keanu chuckled but didn't answer. The manager noticed right away. His face darkened. He slowly turned to the salesman. The salesman's face turned pale again. "Can I have a word with you? In private?" The salesman knew at that moment he was in big trouble. But then Keanu spoke again. He looked at the salesman, his voice calm but sharp. "You know, the richest people are often the ones who feel the least need to prove it." Silence. The salesman felt like he had been punched in the chest. That line was for him. He had been exposed. Keanu turned to the manager and spoke casually as if nothing had happened. "Now then, shall we take a look at the most exclusive jet?" And just like that, he walked away without looking back. The store was silent. But the air had changed. Before, the salesman had been full of confidence, looking down on Keanu. Now he was nothing. A shadow of himself. He couldn't look at anyone. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. His body was stiff, like he was waiting for his punishment. The manager stood beside him, looking serious and disappointed. "Mr. Reeves, I sincerely apologize on behalf of our team," he said. Keanu gave a small smile. "There's no need to apologize." The manager blinked, surprised. The salesman, who already felt destroyed, looked up in confusion. Keanu continued, his voice calm and kind. "I've seen this before. Many times." He looked at the salesman. "And I bet you have too." The salesman swallowed hard. People being judged by their clothes, by how they look, by what others think they can or can't afford. Keanu took a deep breath, putting his hands in his pockets. "The problem is, these judgments are never as simple as they seem." He took a slow step forward. "You looked at me and thought you knew who I was." The salesman lowered his head. He had no words. "You assumed I was nobody. A poor man. A dreamer who came in just to imagine a life he could never have." Keanu paused, letting the words sink in. Then he said something that shocked the salesman. "But what if I was?" The salesman's eyes widened. Keanu tilted his head slightly, watching him closely. "What if I was just a man with no money? Just a dreamer who couldn't buy anything here? Would that mean I don't deserve respect?" The salesman held his breath. The store became even quieter. Keanu gave a small smile, but his words were heavy. Because in the end, it's not about money. It never was. He looked around as if speaking to everyone, not just the salesman. "It doesn't matter if someone walks in here wearing a $20,000 suit or a $20 t-shirt. Everyone deserves respect." The manager nodded slowly. He looked impressed. The salesman, however, looked smaller than ever. His own actions were crushing him. Keanu took a small breath and placed his hand on the salesman's shoulder. "You're young. You still have time to learn," he said. The salesman felt a lump in his throat. His heart pounded in his chest. "But do you want to learn?" Keanu asked. The question hung in the air. The salesman couldn't answer right away. He wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Keanu didn't say anything else. He simply took a step back and turned to the manager. "Now then, I think we can continue the tour," Keanu said. Then he walked forward. There was no anger in his steps. No grudges. He wasn't upset. He was calm and sure of himself. He knew he had given the salesman a valuable lesson. The manager nodded with respect and followed Keanu. But the salesman stayed behind. He stood there frozen. His head was spinning. Slowly he looked down at his hands. He had been holding the weight of his mistake without even realizing it. For the first time he felt truly ashamed of himself. But the real question was, did the salesman learn anything from this? Inside the store, things returned to normal. But something had changed. The other employees, who had barely noticed Keanu when he arrived, were now whispering among themselves. They exchanged glances. They knew something important had just happened. The salesman, still pale and speechless, couldn't move. But while the store was settling down, something much bigger was happening outside. A woman who had been watching from a distance had recorded the entire moment on her phone. She had captured every second of the interaction, Keanu's patience, the salesman's rudeness, and the lesson Keanu had given him. And now the world was about to see it. The video spread like wildfire. It was everywhere, on social media, on news websites, on TV. People couldn't stop talking about it. The Jet store, once known for its luxury and exclusivity, was now being talked about for an entirely different reason: arrogance and disrespect. The internet was furious. The comment sections were flooded with opinions. How could they treat Keanu like that? This is why you should never judge someone by how they look. Keanu handled this so well. What a legend. As the outrage grew, the company's board of directors had no choice but to act fast. They held an emergency meeting. They had to do something to fix their reputation. A few days later, the store announced a major change. They promised to train their employees to treat customers better. They apologized publicly and said they would improve their customer service. But the biggest change? The salesman. He was being attacked online. People were calling him arrogant, rude, and unprofessional. He tried to avoid the public eye, but inside the store he couldn't hide from what he had done. One day his manager called him into a meeting. The manager sat across from him and looked serious. "You know why you're here, right?" he asked. The salesman slowly nodded, keeping his eyes down. "I do," he said quietly. The manager crossed his arms. "You made a big mistake," he said. "You didn't just disrespect a customer. You made the whole store look bad." The salesman felt the weight of guilt pressing down on him. "I know," he admitted, "and I regret it." The manager didn't speak for a moment. Then he asked, "Tell me, what did you learn from this?" The salesman hesitated. Then he looked up. "We should never judge a customer by how they look," he said. The manager raised an eyebrow. "That's it?" The salesman swallowed hard. "And that respect should always come first," he added. The manager nodded slowly. "And are you willing to change?" The salesman took a deep breath. "Yes, I am," he said. The manager stayed silent for a long time. Then he finally spoke. "The store has decided not to fire you," he said. The salesman's eyes widened in shock. I still have my job?" he asked, barely believing it. The manager smirked slightly. "Yes, but not in your current position. The decision was made. The salesman wouldn't be fired, but he was demoted. Instead of selling luxury jets, he would now work as a customer service assistant. His new job? To greet every customer who walked through the door, no matter what they wore, no matter what they looked like. "If you want to stay," the manager said, "you're going to have to learn the hard way." The salesman didn't argue. He knew he had no right to complain. For the first time since the incident, he felt like he had a chance to start over. As the store worked to fix its mistakes, everyone was waiting for Keanu Reeves to say something. Reporters followed him, asking him about the situation. But as always, Keanu was calm. He didn't get angry. He didn't insult anyone. When a reporter asked about the incident, Keanu simply smiled and said, "This has already been resolved in the best way possible." That was it. No resentment. No revenge. Just Keanu being Keanu. But deep down he knew that this story had made a difference. He didn't want the salesman to be ruined. He didn't want anyone to be canceled. He just wanted people to learn. And this time someone did. The store was working hard to change. The salesman was learning an important lesson. Keanu's story wasn't just a viral moment. It became a real example of transformation. Because in the end it was never about money. It was never about fancy jets. It was about respect. And that is the most valuable thing in the world. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories filled with adventure, mystery, and excitement. Your support means the world and it helps keep these stories coming. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.